I tell you what, I'm glad I've waited to do my review of the S25 Ultra, because over the last couple of weeks as I've been using this, carrying it around, I've changed my mind on this a half a dozen times. And not in just some YouTuber wanky way of, oh, S25 Ultra, did I make a mistake? Or what went wrong, clickbaity title nonsense. It's because when I went for my hands-on with this guy, my first impressions, I came away quite underwhelmed. The camera had barely changed, bar a new ultra-wide lens. We have the same RAM, same storage, same battery size, and same charging speed as the S20 Ultra from 5 years ago. They removed Bluetooth support from our precious S Pen, and all Samsung seem to have done is focus on gimmicky AI features that you might use a couple of times and then never again. And all that is true. This is probably one of the least exciting flagship Ultra phones from Samsung we've had in years. There isn't one big sort of hang your hat on feature to make you want to rush out and spend, well, £1,250 or $1,300 on one of these. However, now I've spent a bit of time with this, testing the camera, the battery, using it every day, this is actually a bigger upgrade than I had expected. Have a look at this. Using my nifty new thermal imaging camera with the S24 Ultra on the left and the S25 Ultra on the right, this is after 15 minutes of gaming, and it turns out the new phone, with its 8 Elite for Galaxy chip and 40% bigger vapor chamber cooler, is actually about 1 to 2 degrees Celsius cooler. Nothing crazy, but a nice refinement, especially when you consider it's also about 40% faster, breaking the 10,000 mark in Geekbench multi-core, and if we jump over to 3D Mark, it's around 35% faster. The stability score does suggest it throttles more, but even the lower score is still significantly higher, translating to potentially much higher frame rates for games. To be fair though, none of that really matters for most of us. There's only a handful of games that can utilize that kind of performance, and even then it's just for ray tracing effects or making sure you hit a consistent 120 FPS. But then, you know, one man's overkill is another man's future-proofing. The point is though, the Snapdragon 8 Elite for Galaxy chip that we get in all S25s globally, even the regular S25 as well as the Plus and the Ultra, is a surprisingly big upgrade, and not just for making the numbers go higher in performance benchmarks. It's also a lot more efficient, because despite sticking to the same 5,000 mAh cell as last year, and the year before, and another 3 years before that, the battery life is noticeably better. In my big flagship battery drain test I made the other day, when the S24 Ultra ran out of juice, the S25 Ultra still had 6 percentage points left in the tank, good for another 45 minutes of runtime, although the Oppos and Vivos and Honors of this world are on another level. But I also ran a little YouTube streaming test, and when the S24 Ultra died, the S25 still had 10% left, good for another couple of hours of video. But still no change to charging speeds, wired or wireless, and it's still very much BYOC. Bring your own charger. So far then, it's 30 to 40% faster, it runs 1 to 2 degrees cooler, the battery lasts 5 to 10% longer, all in a chassis that's 15 grams lighter, with a 0.1 inch bigger screen, and still room for an S Pen, albeit downgraded. And if your name is Mr. Moneybags, then you can spec this with up to 1 terabyte of storage. Although it still starts at 256, and all models get 12 gigs of RAM, unless you're in Korea, where there is a 16 gig option. I think what I was most disappointed by though was the camera. Again, they were just relying on processing improvements, their Pro Visual engine. Yes, we have a new 50 megapixel ultra-wide, but otherwise the hardware is kind of the same for the last 2 or 3 years. And when Android rivals are giving us 1-inch sensors and 200 megapixel zoom cameras and really nice color science from Hasselblad and Leica, this just feels kind of boring. You know where this is going. However, now I've spent some time with it. I've compared it to the iPhone in my full camera comparison video, and if you haven't checked that out yet, I'll leave a link at the end of this video. But I've also compared it to last year's S24 Ultra just to see if it was much of an upgrade. Have a look for yourself. The first thing that jumped out is that the S25 Ultra's colors are just less oversaturated and more true to life versus last year. In some cases it can look a bit too muted now. You can see the difference in the gold color on this clock that I've zoomed into. But most of the time, I think it's a big upgrade. You can see with my face, skin tones are more natural. You can see my face is, well, less reddish, and the grass in the background looks less like they've added some coloring dye to it. And whatever was going on with my jumper here seems to have been fixed. We're just getting a more balanced exposure and a more professional looking shot. And that goes for both the rear camera with its 4 lenses and also the selfie, which still has the exact same camera as last year, but I'm sure you would agree the new one on the right is much better. And that goes for video as well. If I zoom into Mrs. Tech Chap here, who's holding my camera, the S24 Ultra looks like someone's dragged the contrast and sharpening slider up in Photoshop. And particularly in low light, they've reduced noise and improved fine texture details. You can see the bricks on my wall there look much more defined. It just goes to show that specs do not tell the full story. Without doubt, the camera, just in terms of image quality alone, is a marked upgrade over the S24 Ultra. There's definitely still room for improvement, but looking at the wall, in particular in the background, there is a lot less noise here. And we've got all the extra stuff, like this new zoom slider, which you can toggle on when you're filming to zoom in and out more smoothly. For me though, the biggest upgrade by far is the ability to shoot video in log now, which basically means when you shoot video, it can capture a wider dynamic range, there's more information. And so if you're a bit more professional and you want to give your footage your own kind of unique aesthetic, then you can add your own LUT on afterwards in the editor, or much easier, just press this one button, which adds Samsung's correct color back in. And the fact that you can shoot in log at all resolutions, all frame rates with all cameras, except for the selfie, you may as well just always film in log. We do also have this new AI audio eraser, which can help improve the sound quality of your videos. Pixel phones have had it for a couple of years now. Apple introduced it last year, but it's nice to see finally on a Samsung. But this is how it sounds with the audio eraser, and then back to without. And similarly borrowed from Pixel is the new Best Face feature, which so far I've had mixed results with. So despite my complaining in my hands-on video, I have to say the S25 Ultra's camera is better than I expected. Have they done enough compared to the likes of the Vivo X200 Pros and Oppo Find X8 Pros and Honor Magic 7 Pros of the world? And to give you a bit of an idea of the difference, here is a side-by-side portrait shot. And I've also got a second shot here where I zoomed in to their telephoto lenses, but as the saying goes, comparison is the thief of joy, and I really do believe that. And in its own right, the S25 Ultra's camera is still incredible. The sheer breadth of features, from being able to shoot in 8K 30 log, 4K 120, the expert RAW mode, which gives you variable apertures and virtual ND filters and astrophotography modes. And I just love being able to tap on a video to get instant slow motion and then save the clip. You've got director's view, you can start and stop recording, as well as switch to the front and the rear cameras while recording. It's a fantastic point and shoot camera, particularly with the more natural colors this year. It still has the biggest range of more pro features if you like to tinker. But it all still feels kind of iterative. I just want to see bigger sensors and an improvement to motion handling, versus the iPhone, the S25 Ultra shots were all blurry here. And with this very handsome dog here, I was trying to get a really nice shot, and only one or two of maybe the dozen I took were actually sharp and in focus. I think what I'm most impressed by is that we're, over 10 minutes into this video, and we haven't even talked about the AI features yet. So the S25s ship with Samsung's OneUI 7 software running on top of Android 15, and we get a whopping 7 years of OS updates. So hats off to Samsung for their support. If you are interested in all the Galaxy AI features and everything you can do with this phone, then check out my top 25 tips and tricks for the Galaxy S25. For this review, I'm not going to go through every single feature. The fact is, whether you use them or not, the S25 series offers the broadest, most comprehensive range of AI features that you can get on a phone right now. Are you going to use Portrait Studio every day? Probably not. Are you going to use Call Recorder every day? Probably not. But even if one of these can help make your life easier or change the way you use your phone, then fair enough, it's a reason to upgrade. Just because Samsung go on and on and on about Galaxy AI and there's more features than you could throw a stick at, it doesn't mean you have to use them, but it might be useful. And for me, things like AI Select, which is basically a renamed Smart Select, the YouTube summarizations, the call recordings, which you can then put into a Notes app, which you can then summarize and then translate, and paired with the S Pen and Dex and some cool features in Galaxy Labs, it is one of, if not the most capable phones you can buy. I was going to say well-rounded phones, just so I could then segue into talking about this design. Let's just assume I said well-rounded, because speaking of well-rounded, the big news this year is, of course, that they've rounded these corners and also flattened the edge and made it 15 grams lighter, which all add up to make this actually significantly more comfortable to hold, if also a little bit more slippery as well. Make sure it doesn't slide out your pocket. This is titanium silver, which I think is very nice. I think my favorite one is probably the jet black, which is a Samsung Online exclusive color. The only thing I don't like is these slightly chunky bezels for the camera rings. I don't know why they've added that, but I do like the fact that they've managed to squeeze in a 6.9-inch screen, so 0.1 inch bigger than last year, within a very similar footprint, which, as I say, is still 15 grams lighter. And we have, I think it's 30% thinner bezels, I believe it is, but it is still an absolutely gorgeous screen, and particularly with this anti-reflective coating, which to my knowledge no other phone offers yet. And if I put it side by side with the iPhone, this is the 16 Pro Max, and just shine it at my window, it makes such a difference to the usability of this phone outdoors in bright sunlight when you're using the camera and framing it. I absolutely adore this screen. One new feature though, which is kind of hard to show over camera, is this Pro Scaler. They've basically borrowed the AI upscaling tech from their TV team and put it in the phone, which they say can enhance the clarity and the viewing experience by about 40%, whatever that means. In practice, side by side with last year's phone and both running at Quad HD, I couldn't really see that much difference. The only thing I did notice was the colors, which on the new phone actually do look better, and both devices here are set to their natural color tone. They have also made the glass a little bit tougher, although unfortunately there is no IP69 rating, which some of its rivals do offer now to protect against hot jets of water. But overall, I think this is still one of the nicest, one of the most comfortable, and also one of the most impressive displays that we have on a phone. I just wish they put a little bit more effort into the eye comfort features, perhaps by giving us a higher PWM rating, the pulse width modulation, which we're seeing on Honor phones, for example. That would be nice to see, but otherwise, fantastic screen. The S25 Ultra is not a particularly exciting phone, but it does a lot of things a bit better than before, and it adds up to, I would say, more than the sum of its parts. Name me another phone that can have a terabyte of storage, with an S Pen, with an anti-reflective screen, with 4 camera lenses of this quality, with 7 years of software support, with some of the most impressive performance, and whether you use them or not, all those extra Galaxy AI features. Or you could save yourself £300 and get a OnePlus 13, which has a comparable, if not better, camera now, longer battery life, and dare I say even nicer software. If you were to pick between these two, which would you go for? So it's a bit boring, but it's still very, very good. And if you buy one of these, you will not be disappointed. But what do you reckon? Are you going to buy yourself an S25 or a Plus or an Ultra, or skip this year? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, a like and subscribe would be fantastic. And I'll see you next time right here on the Tech Chat.